Here we go. Here's
Oh,
Karen. Hi, Karen.
Hello, everybody.
Hi, good to see everybody.
As usual,
Now-
the woman is the one that has
Oh, you couldn't
all the...
see everyone before?
No, we can see everybody, but we want Amihud to have the host.
All right.
And if I
I
can
start,
also record,
before I
last
go
time you
on
didn't
to that,
record.
before I go on to that, I automatically started recording the meeting, so it's automatic in the.
Oh, it's recording. Yeah, I can see that the dial
Okay,
is
so
on.
it's recording this week. And second,
And send the link afterwards. Okay, please.
who wants the? Yeah, okay. Who's hosting? Amihud?
Better for Amihud, yeah. It's better.
should
He
be
has all the
Amihud, but
material.
right
And then
now
I
it's
can
you.
share the screen.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Now I can
You're
share
on.
the screen. I'm on.
Right on.
Okay,
Perfect.
we're going to
Karen, you
start.
are the best.
Okay. I'll talk to you all later.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Karen, thank you very much.
My
Litrot.
pleasure. My pleasure, Litra.
We're starting Parashat Ki Teze, and there's an enormous amount of mitzvot.
You need to enlarge it. You need to enlarge it.
I
It's only
know. I'm
33%.
especially showing you the page, which is a very small, a very condensed page. So you'll see that the page has got enormous amount of information, mitzvot. And here I'm enlarging it. I hope you can see it now, much bigger.
Beautiful.
Okay. And I'll give just a small introduction that Parashat Ki Teze, we talked about it already a few weeks ago. That is the details of the five last dibrot,
Commandments.
commandments. The five last commandments. We said that the Sefer Dvarim is going by the 10 commandments. And actually, Parashat Ki Teze is already the details of the five last ones, which is Ben Adam Lechavero, a person to a person. And here we're talking about mainly a person to a person. And of course, this parasha is very condensed with 74 mitzvot. Wow. That's by the Sefer Chinuch. Others count a tiny bit less, a tiny bit more. But if you were talking about 74 mitzvot, it's the parasha that has the most mitzvot possible. Even Parashat Mishpatim has something like 30, 35 mitzvot. Here we're talking about double the amount. And we're starting, I won't be able to go through the whole parasha, but here you can see that I wrote on the top here, page 1, we are talking about 3 or 3.5 chapters from chapter 21 to chapter 23. So here we're going through quite a long list. I'll just say that I made it a tiny bit smaller so you can see that in the green here, soon I'll say what's in the inside the green. There's 4 different sections, but in this first big section of the green, we're talking about, here I wrote it on the right, dinim b'matzavim charigim. These are commandments which are unusual in different unusual situations. Of course, we're talking about at the beginning in war, and this is the continuation of the last portion, Parashat Shoftim, which is talking about the end of Parashat Shoftim is talking about war, and there's talking about Agla Rufa and other commandments which are talking about war. So we're carrying on in the time of war, and it's a possibility of taking Eshet Yefat Torah, which I'll soon explain. Is of course the Torah doesn't permit it completely, and like Chazal call it, Dibra Torah keneged Yetzer Hara. Keneged Yetzer Hara. Yeah, Dibra Torah b'lshon bnei Adam, but we're talking about Dibra Torah keneged Yetzer Hara. That means the Torah actually allowed it b'diavad, only unintentionally, because it's not good to take a woman in the time of war, but when they went in the old times to war, it didn't mean 5 days, 10 days, a month. They went for years. And actually, people, soldiers that didn't see their wives for many, many years, had this urge to take a woman, and the Torah, if didn't permit it, they would do it, they would make a sin. So the Torah went to the Yetzer Hara and said, okay, if you can't prevent it, okay, I'll give you a few conditions, or quite a lot of the conditions, that you may take a wife. But anyhow, this is one unusual mitzvah. The second unusual mitzvah is when somebody has two women and he differentiates between the loved woman and the unloved woman. Who's the first one, by the way? Who's the
unloved?
The
The unloved
unloved
has priority.
Of course, we'll talk about it in a few minutes, that the Torah is hinting very strongly against who? Yaakov. Yaakov, that had two women, one loved and one unloved, and we'll see that the Torah knows also to uncompliment and also even be against a few things that our fathers did. Wow, that is unusual for any religion that goes and preserves saints or preserve the important people in the religion. Here, it's unusual, not unusual. It's the only religion that goes and says, yes, they were righteous, but even Moshe Rabbeinu sinned. Even Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov sinned, and the Torah will say it very clearly. So that's unusual, that it's unusual in a state of having two women, one loved and one unloved, and you're not allowed to skip the unloved wife, and definitely not her children. The third situation is Ben Sower or Moe, somebody who has a child that rebels so unusually that the Torah gives an unusual mitzvah to go and kill him. How can parents kill their son? It's really impossible. The Chazal many times find mitzvot which are so unusual that they many times take out the possibility of making the mitzvah possible. So much so that even Rabbi Yossi in the Mishnah comes and says it is impossible to have such a mitzvah. So Dibra Torah, the Torah is actually talking Lagdil Torah v'la'adir. The Torah is only giving a possibility which is impossible, which is actually only, let's say, very unusual, so unusual that it's impossible, and Chazal make this mitzvah that actually it never happened. We'll see that there was one incident that it actually did happen. And the fourth mitzvah, we're talking about hanging somebody. It's not hanging somebody, we never hang people. But we're talking about when you have to kill somebody by the Beit Din, one of the four different ways of killing them. If it's a terrible sin, you hang not the person, you hang the body. And that is unusual, of course, very seldom that it happens, and you hang the body only for a few minutes. Already Chazal said that it's only before sundown, because it's written here that you're not allowed to leave him alive, up on the hanging up, and it's very seldom. So all these four mitzvot are really very seldom. I'll say that actually these four mitzvot are so unusual that there was one person that all this happened to him. And I must say, it's the most unusual person that you would think of. Who we're talking about? David HaMelech. By the way, David HaMelech is the centerpiece of the whole Tanakh. If there's anybody who's written so many chapters about him, it's only David HaMelech. David HaMelech is the centerpiece or the center person of the whole Tanakh, more than Moshe Rabbeinu, more than Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. And if anybody who's mentioned more than anybody else in the whole Tanakh and Tehillim and everywhere else is David HaMelech. And David HaMelech, by the way, he took in one of the wars, he took Eshet Yafat Toar. He took, while he was fighting many, many wars, he took Eshet Yafat Toar, the mother of Absalom. We'll soon talk about him. She was a Goya, and she was a daughter of the king in Kshur, Talmai Melech Kshur. I won't go into the details. And by the way, later, one of the sons, she had a few sons probably, but the main son was Avshalom. Later, it comes out that David had many wives. He had more than two, but he had many wives. And at the end, probably he less liked his mother. He took her because he wanted her in during the war. And that wife, by the way, was pushed away. And by the way, probably the son fought for his dignity. I'm important. Why doesn't my father make me important? And he goes, and that's what's written here. David had more than two wives. By Chazal, he had even 18 wives. He was permitted to have until 18 wives. I managed to, by the way, find 11 wives. By name, I managed to find 11 wives, not more than 11 wives. Chazal said that he had 18. Okay, yes, it's true, not as true, but at least he had more than 10 wives, and that son was pushed away, and that son rebelled very strongly against the father. And then we go to the third mitzvah, which is talking about Ben Sorer or Moreh. That was a terrifying son. I'm saying terrifying because he was so evil to his father that he wanted to kill his father. Absalom went to war against his father. He managed to kick David for half a year, and David was a king, and he threw him out from kingdom for half a year. And David had to run away to the other side of the Jordan for half a year. It's not written, but Chazal make it up as half a year. And he wanted to kill him. Of course, later, David, with his chief of staff, Yoav, managed to defeat the whole army of Shalom. Half of the army was really killed, not only by David, also by the forest. The forest animals killed many of the army, because the army of Absalom wasn't as strong and wasn't ready for the whole war like David's army. And then comes the fourth mitzvah. And the fourth mitzvah is to hang a body. That's exactly what happened to Absalom. If you remember, Absalom had enormous amount of hair. He was an Azir. And when he was running, chasing, trying to chase David, his hair got stuck in the one of the trees, the Elah, in the forest. And later Yoav killed him while he was hanging. So here you can see 4 different mitzvot, which are unusual, but it happened on one person, on the main person of the Tanakh, on David HaMelech. You can see that even David HaMelech, such a righteous person, really righteous, but he sinned and he did mistakes. He knew to repent. And here, actually, the Tanakh is trying to show you the order of these mitzvot that actually happened to David. Let's go to the next section. The next section is, we said that the first section is talking about mitzvot which are unusual. Now we're talking about usual mitzvot, things that happen day to day. Why do I say day to day? Because have a look at the words that I've bolded in red. Hashev teshivem. It's like doubling the verb. Hashev teshivem. And next mitzvah is hakem takim. I won't go into the whole mitzvot, but I'm just saying that when you have to return something, you have to really return it and do an effort to return it. But it's written double. Hakem takim. Hashev teshivem. And later it's written about a bird, that if you find a bird and you want to take its eggs, you have to first throw or chase away the mother. And here again, you've got the double verb, shaleach teshalech, shalech teshalach. And then you've got another, all these verbs show that these are usual things that happen, but you have to try and make an effort. By the way, that also happens on the last mitzvah of hanging the body, but later you have to bury it also. That is a usual mitzvah. What can we do in our world after 120 years old? We hope that we all live 120 years at least. Afterwards, people perish, and it's written kavor tikberenu. Here's also written a double verb, which means don't forget to bury, and we know that already from Sarah, we know it from all kinds of places, and actually from here you can see that it's a mitzvah not to bury, and so on. So these mitzvot are talking about the usual day-to-day mitzvot. Then the Torah goes into other mitzvot, which is talking about unusual things that happen, that people are not behaving with their families or with their wives properly. I wrote here in Hebrew in yellow, Dinei Ishut, which is marrying or unmarrying, or how do you say it in English? Things to do with wives and women.
Marital laws.
Okay, married laws and so on, but not the usual ones. And it happens here, and not usual people who hate their wives or take lashon hara. Here you can see in yellow, hotzi lashon hara, or people who are saying bad things on their wives and they are true, to kill them, not to kill them. We won't go into details. Perhaps in the next page we'll talk something about it. And then at the last section, here we're talking about, to do with the section that we talked about in married laws. Here are the women that you're not meant to marry. And that's in green here. And we're talking about here, first of all, you're not allowed to take a father's wife, even if it's not your mother. Eshet avicha, you're not allowed to take. Kanaf avicha, we'll talk about this at the end of the lesson. We'll talk about why it's written the word kanaf, which means, as if it means the corner of a garment, but it also means the part of your father, kanaf avicha. We'll talk why it's written the word kanaf. Anyhow, later it goes into details of all kinds of peoples that you're not allowed to marry in. It's people which we're talking about, people who have got problems with how would you say it, with their organs, and they're not allowed to, somebody who's can't have children, can't marry. We'll talk, we won't go into details, but the Gemara goes into details who's considered somebody who's really affected and can't get married or can get married. We're talking about a mamzer, somebody who the parents marries wrongly, and the father, mother, they are the ones to blame, but the child is called a mamzer. And why is he suffering? He's not suffering, but the effect of what they did is that he can't marry a normal girl. He's allowed to marry a mamzeret. He's allowed to marry a mamzeret, or he's allowed to marry other kinds of women which came into Am Yisrael, but not the usual girls of Am Yisrael. The whole details are written in the Talmud, and there's a lot written about that in the Talmud. Anyhow, later it's written that you're not allowed to take Ammoni and Moavi, which were really peoples who were cursing by Bilam and Balak and Bilam, and they cursed Am Yisrael, and that's why Hashem was so angry with them. They can't come into Am Yisrael. The men can't come into Am Yisrael, but the women are allowed to come into Am Yisrael. Of course, we're talking about Ruth, that she comes from Moab. She's allowed to marry Ishai, and then David is born from there. But the father, if he's from Moab, he never can come into Am Yisrael. There are different conditions that he can come into Am Yisrael. I won't go into that. And another kind of peoples which are not allowed is Adomi and so on. So here we've got all kinds of mitzvot. And I'll just say one more thing about this page. Many times the mitzvot are divided into three. Here you can see I've showed three different mitzvot, and I'll show here, for instance, in purple or in pink, whatever you think, that usually the mitzvah is divided into three. Usually the conditions before the mitzvah. For instance, the first mitzvah is number 1. If you can see a small 1 here in verse number 10, Ki Teze milchama, when there's a war, so only in a certain long war, you're allowed to take a woman like this, Eshet Yafat Toar. So that's the 2 first verses which are giving the conditioning of the mitzvah. The second part of the mitzvah is usually the details of the mitzvah, and it's from number 2. She has to take off her hair, take off her nails, and so on. I won't go into the details, but usually the mitzvah starts with conditions. The second part of the mitzvah is what are the details of the mitzvah, what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do. And the third part is the third part is usually the punishment if you don't listen, or it means what happens if you don't carry on with this mitzvah. You can't throw out that woman. So here you can see the before the mitzvah, and after the mitzvah. Also in the second part in the green, you can see three types of ben sorer or morer. We're talking about somebody who's rebelling. Also, there are three conditions. There's conditions of what kind of person is it that rebels to his father. Who does he listen or who doesn't he listen? What does he do? That's the conditions. The second part is the part of the mitzvah, the details. And the third part is the punishment of what happens to that person at the end of it, how they kill him and how they don't kill him. I said again, it never happened actually properly. They never killed any parent can't take the child and make him die. It never happened in Judaism. There's something close to it. We talk about Absalom, but actually it never happened. And here's another mitzvah in orange. I'm just giving you three mitzvot, again, dividing into three. And all these mitzvot you can differentiate with the same word that's appeared between number one, number two, which on the first mitzvah, can you see which word is bolded that it differentiates between part one and part two? The word leisha. Can you see the word leisha? Between second part and third part, which is the word which differentiates? Leisha. Also in the second part here, in the second mitzvah, you can see ishma, ishama, v'ishmeu. The same verb appears between the first part, the second part, and the third part. And also at the next mitzvah, I show over and over again that you can always divide the mitzvah into three parts, and there's always a word that differentiates and repeats itself over and over again between the first part, the second part, and the third part. Here you've got the word ikach, here you've got the word velakach, and here they've got the word velakhu. So interesting, you can usually find three parts to every mitzvah, and you can find the three parts by a verb or by a word which repeats itself over and over again. So that's the first page, just to show you how mitzvot are set up in a certain way. I'm going to go to the next part, to the next page. And the next page is talking about more details about these mitzvot. Just one second. Okay, here we go. And here I want to show you the first mitzvah of the Eshet Yafat Toar, and I'm just going to show a few words to show that the Torah doesn't allow properly to take a woman in the war. We said it over a few minutes ago. The Torah actually doesn't exactly allow to take a woman in the war. But when the Torah does actually allow you, there's so many conditions that you really have to be careful. And here I want to show you in red all kinds of phrases which are written about this woman. And you could imagine she's a woman that's taken in the war. She's actually like a concubine. And she's actually a low-class person. Even so, all these verses, all these phrases are written in red exactly later on the second part of the chapter, which are talking about a normal woman. Meaning that the Torah is actually showing you that this woman that you take in war, you can't disgrace her, and you can't really kick her out and do whatever you would think you were doing. In other religions or in other people's way, they could think, if it's a second-hand woman, so I can throw her out, I can beat her up, I can do whatever I think to do. No, the Torah says when she comes into a Jewish household, she's treated exactly like a normal Jewish young good woman. And that's why I'm saying, have a look at all these verses that I've bolded in red. It's exactly parallel. You can see the red is going down to later. We are talking about laws of marriage, and there we are talking about normal Jewish women. And you can see that all these words are repeating over and over. Let's give us 2 or 3 examples. There it's written on the top, a woman that you found in war, you have a crave to have this woman, and by the way, the word isha will always appear here more and more times. Have a look how many times the word isha appears. Here in verse 11, here again in verse 13, the last word, leisha. She's not a concubine, she's not a shifcha, and she's not a amma. She's a isha. And then it's written later, v'shilachta, if you want to send her, so you have to divorce her normally, not throw her out without money. Lotin kerena bekesef, you don't sell her. The other way around, you give her money. Loti tamerba, that means you can't force her and you can't treat her terribly. Tachat asher inita, the other way around. So all these words appear later about a normal woman. Ki kach ish isha, the word isha, of course, appears. I didn't show you before, it's written here, mother and father. Et avir veitima, later also, a woman takes, you take a woman, you get married to a normal woman, it's written, avia nara v'ima, here also the parents are mentioned, and here you've got the kesef, velot isha. So you've got all these words which are appearing on a normal Jewish girl. It also appears on the woman that you've got. So what I want to say in general, when the Torah permits to take a woman from a shiksa, from the war, and I said the Torah doesn't like it, but the Torah talks on Yetzer Hara that really you crave and you've got no way of preventing yourself from taking a woman, you are allowed with many, many conditions, but you have to treat her like a normal woman. That's interesting, what I wanted to show about this mitzvah, that even you take a second-hand woman, she's from the war, she's somebody that you just treating as if to find some satisfaction of your want, you can't throw her out and you can't treat her terribly. That's one thing. The second thing is the second mitzvah, and I said it already a few minutes ago in the page before. Have a look at all the words in blue. We're talking about the second mitzvah. If you have 2 women and one you love and one you don't love, there's only one other place that the whole Torah that it talks about a woman that is loved and a woman which is not loved. I'll say snua is actually a woman that you hate, but it doesn't mean hate, it means you love her less. Where's it written, of course? I wrote it here on the left. Where's it written? Of course, it's written about Yaakov. Okay? If I'll make the page a bit larger.
What about Elkanah?
What? Elkanah is in the Tanakh. You're right. That's I'm talking about the Torah, but later, of course, Elkanah does the same, but not the same, because actually he didn't treat. He treated both women much better. He mended what Yaakov didn't mend. You're right. Elkanah is a good example, but I'm talking about in the Torah, and the Torah is referring to what Yaakov did, and the Torah is showing you that Yaakov did the wrong thing. That's what I want to show. The Torah can't talk on something which is in the future. The Torah is talking about something which is in the past. Yes, Yaakov is the prime of. We've got 3 fathers, but the prime one is Yaakov. Even so, the Torah knows to say, here, remember that also Yaakov didn't do the right thing. I've got here, I've enlarged the page in blue, and I'm showing you here on the left, between, these are all kinds of phrases which are taken from Yaakov, and there's a bikoret, and the Torah is not liking what Yaakov. The Torah is not using the word Yaakov, but there's only one place where you've gotten written Ahuva v'snuah, and we'll soon see also the word Reshit Ono. You can't skip your first son, even if the first son comes from the less wanted woman, and you skip and you give the prime Bechorah, you give all the presents to the loved woman's son. You can't skip, and that's exactly what Yaakov did, that he gave Yosef the prime, he gave him the beautiful garment, the Ktonet Pasim, and who didn't he make the Ktonet Pasim? To Reuven. Reuven should have had the Ktonet Pasim. He's the prime, and he's the firstborn. Even so you can see all these words. I'll just read here. Vayehav Yaakov et Rachel, Vayar ki snua le'ah. All these words are written about Yaakov, and later in nearly the last chapter, when Yaakov benches or blesses his sons, Reuven Bechori, Izer Bechor, Vereshit Oni. So here you can see I'm making now the page a bit smaller. Why does the Torah use all these phrases? Because the Torah is saying, don't behave like Yaakov. And here I want to say an important issue. Many times we see that the Torah has got some issues against all kinds of important people, like Moshe Rabbeinu, like Yaakov, and I can go to more other important people. Why does the Torah do that? Because the Torah is trying to show that people are people, which means 95% of what they did they were righteous. Definitely, I'll say 95%. I'm not saying 99% because I can't exactly put the borderline. But let's say 99%, 95%, doesn't matter. For the thing is, Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov, and Moshe, and Levi, and all the important guys in the Torah are really chosen because they were amazing people. And the Torah copies many things that they behaved, and does it and says in the Torah, do exactly what they did. And many times you can see, for instance, Abraham was a righteous person, ki tzedakah, the tzedakah ve'emet, the word emet and tzedakah are written about Abraham, and the Torah repeats those words and says, like Abraham was a tzaddik, and he did tzedakah, and he did emet, carry on and copy Abraham. And the Torah always copies 95% of what they did. But many times, not many, but a few times, 5%, the Torah also grumbles and says, don't do what they did. And here's one of the places, and there are a few other places like that, but I won't go into other details, that other mitzvot are always resembling and giving hints, yes, somebody else did that, don't copy that. And definitely here, you can see in blue how many times the Torah is actually mentioning Yaakov without saying that and saying, don't do what he did. So that's an important issue in the mitzvot. A third issue that I want to show in shortly, I won't do it a longer thing, is all these laws which are talking about how to behave in marriage. And we talked about in the last page, in the first page, we talked about that these are unusual ways of people behaving to their wives. Of course, it's not usual. It should be love and should be treasuring and really escorting and having a proper family. But here we are talking about unusual situations, which are terrible situations. And here I show, like usual, that always the Torah shows the first part parallel to the last part. I take a section of these laws, which are talking about family laws, and you can see that all the words which are written in red, by the way, the same red which is up on the first mitzvah also appears on the laws here. Like I said before, that a woman is a woman. It doesn't matter if she comes from outside. If you married her in war, she's a woman, and you expected to behave to her properly like any other woman. And here these words repeat themselves also on the first law and also on the last law of this section. So you can see, I wrote here on the left here, 1a, which is parallel to 1b, and red goes with red. For instance, ki ikach ish isha, if you take a woman, uva alea visnea, and you hate her, which is not usual, you shouldn't hate your woman, vaikrav, and then he starts grumbling in front of the court and saying, vaikrav elea, and she wasn't behaving herself, she wasn't like she said that she wasn't married before, and so on. I won't go into the whole thing. And all these verses are repeated, all these phrases are repeated exactly the same also at the bottom. Can you see the red is parallel to the red here? And even so, also the punishment is exactly the same. After they found out that that guy was lying about his wife and he was telling tales about his wife, he is punished by money. He has to give the father of his wife because he took out and he condemned the wife and condemned actually her father, her family. So he's punished severely by money. And then he can't divorce his wife forever. By the way, the Talmud says she can decide if she wants to get divorced. But if she loves him, even he's been so terrible to her, he can never divorce her, which is a punishment. He wanted to get rid of that woman. The Torah is giving her a punishment. You can't get rid of the woman. Of this wife. You wanted to ridicule her, you wanted to complain about her, you wanted to grumble about her and get rid of her, the other way around. You have to pay a severe price of money, and you have to keep her, you have to be bonded, and you're tied with her. I said again, it depends if the wife agrees. If she doesn't agree, she doesn't have to be bonded to him. But he is bonded to her. The same words are also written at the bottom. Here it's written, Chamishim Kesef, also a severe a punishment that he's paid if somebody raped. I won't go into the whole discussion here, but again, we're talking about a law that somebody raped a girl, and he thought that he can get rid of her, like Amnon and Tamar, that he raped his sister. Was it really a sister or not a sister? I won't go into that. It was half his sister, and he raped her, and he got rid of her. But here, you can't get rid of her. The other way around, you have to pay money to the father. So you can see that also here, he's bound. You took her and you raped her. You can't disconnect yourself from her. She can disconnect herself from him if she doesn't want to carry on the connection. She can ask in the Beit Din to be divorced, but he can't divorce her. So you can see 1A goes with 1B, and the same with also 2A goes with 2B. I won't go into the whole discussion of 2A is parallel to 2B, but have a look what's in the middle. Always when you've got a chiastic section or paragraph, that the first part is parallel to the last part and the second part is parallel to the second part from the end, you always have to find in the middle what is bolded in the middle. And here is important to see that there's an interesting verse in the middle. And I wrote here in yellow, ha'ikar, or the tzir, the middle part, which is the most important. So let's read what's written in verse number 22. Ki imatze ish shochev im isha beulat baal umetu gam shnehem. The usual stories that we have in all kinds of films and in all kinds of love stories or not love stories is usually in the Hollywood. You are from America, so you know that the usual thing is a man or a woman that deceits and goes to find another woman while he's married. And here the Torah is saying that is that is terrible, that's unfortunate, that's the wrong Jewish thing. And the main part in the middle is, if you find a man taking somebody else's wife, that she's married to him, and these two guys, also the woman, also the man, agreed to one another, they're punished severely, they're killed. You should get rid of this terrible sin in Am Yisrael. So that's perhaps the major part, which is a small part. It's only one verse or in the middle, but it's showing you actually the enterprise, the important part of Jewish family. The Jewish family is keep the house holy, keep the house sacred, keep the house from defying one another, not the woman going to another man, not the man going to another woman. And here, it's written here, you should get rid of that, and that's why it's the part in the middle. Any questions about that? Because I want to go to the third part, a short third part. Okay, after we've discussed that, I want to go to the third page, the same pages, but showing something interesting in the third page. Just 1 second. Okay. Here's the third page. Okay, this is the third page. Again, all this section with many, many mizvot. And I want to show a few words which are, this third page, I'll start from the top, is exactly the same parasha, the same section that we're talking about, Parashat Ki Teze. And this is the third page, which is talking about milim manchot, words which are copied over and over again, and they always give a certain idea why they are mentioned over and over again, because they're trying to show a certain idea. I always show that many words, we showed it last week, for instance, the word navi or the word ledaber is always talking about somebody who's defying or not listening to the prophet. So the word davar, we saw it last week, in 6 different verses, you've got 16 times the word ledaber, ledaber, ledaber. So also here you find many words which are repeated over and over again, and it's trying to give us some kind of idea. So one of the words are in red, the word na'ara, and always in the Torah. Interesting. I found it also like that the whole time in the Tanakh. The word na'ara is written without the hey at the end. The letter hey should be written in Hebrew. It should be hey nun ein reish hey, and always it's written without the hey, except once. Except once, and I have to explain why. The word na'ara always means a young girl, and it means a young girl which is not married, and you have to keep a young Jewish girl sacred, and you can't defy her. That means if you want to take her, marry her, but don't just use her up and chas v'chalila go and rape her or go and behave to her. We hear so many stories in the news and all kinds of politicians that go and use girls and use as if they are nothing. Comes the Torah and uses the word na'ara without the hey over and over again. I even wrote here how many times. It's written 14 times in this chapter, or these chapters is written the word na'ara 14 times, the word na'ara without a hey, which means you have to behave to a girl as if it was a boy. That's the explanation. That means, okay, I'm not talking about today abnormal people which are boys with boys or girls with girls. The normal way of people are that people get married to girls, but you should know that if you want to marry a girl, it's all right. But if you're not marrying her, don't be a bully with her, and don't, of course, rape her, and behave to her as if she's another boy. And that's why it's always written the word na'ara without a hey, through the whole Tanakh, by the way. Through the whole Tanakh, it's always written. For instance, I'm giving you the first verse here, which is written, Vaikach avi ha'ne'ara v'ima v'otziu et betulei ha'ne'ara. The girl is always like she's as if she's a boy. You behave to her gently, or you don't touch her like you wouldn't touch a boy. You wouldn't go and touch a boy. The only place which is written in verse 19, where it's written the word na'ara fully with a hey, is here after she's been raped, and here she's been already she's been ruined, she's been defiled, and so on. Here comes the Torah and says, after you defiled her, now you have to, now is written the word na'ara, which means she's been defiled as somebody who's been, so here it's written here in verse number 19, Ve'anshu, you should punish that guy that raped the girl, Ve'anshu oto mea kesef, it's a severe punishment, it's a lot of money, 100 pieces of silver, by the way. Kesef in the Torah is always not money, but it means silver, which is enormous amount of money, or very expensive. V'natnu le'avi ha'ne'ara. Why here is written the word na'ara fully? Because after she's been defiled, so you can't call her na'ar. You can't call her she's a boy because she was defiled. You aggravated her. You behaved to her terribly. Somebody who's raped her, so she's called a na'ara. But this is the only place the word na'ara is full. So when she's already been defiled, she's called here na'ara, but always she's called na'ar, na'ar, na'ar. Of course, we use the word na'ara, it means girl, but we are using it as if it's written the word boy, which means like a boy you don't touch, you don't go, usually, I hope so, you don't go and rape a boy, so behave to the girl as if it was a boy. That's one interesting thing that I found here in this parasha. And by the way, the whole Torah, the word na'ara is always without a hair except here. The second word that I want to show you is the word leisha. I said that already before, that 3 times it's written in the first paragraph, the first mitzvah, that when you take a woman in war, you have to behave to her politely. She's not a second type of woman. She's not a concubine. She's not a second person that you can not behave with her properly. She's always called Isha, 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 and it always appears much later. And the third thing that I want to show is the word achicha. The word achicha. The word brother. And here it appears 7 times, the word brother. And always when you don't feel that he's a brother, the Torah says, it's your brother. And you can't treat his belongings as if it's not your brother. So of course, you can't hit anybody, you can't go and affect him badly. It's also to do with his belongings. And have a look how many times it's written the word brother, especially when we're talking about his belongings, meaning he's your brother as if it's your real brother, biological your brother. Lo tir'eh et shor achicha, you can't see a donkey or ox walking around, but not an ox that belongs to your brother. Of course, it doesn't mean your brother biologically. It means any Jew or any person that you see an ox, behave as if it's your brother's belongings. Shor achicha or tzio, you have to return Hashev Teshivem le'achicha. Can you see how many times it's written the word achicha, achicha? And I bolded it in blue. Vim lo karov achicha elecha. And if you don't know who's your brother, you don't know who it is, you live in America, and perhaps this donkey, the owner doesn't live in America, he lives somewhere else. So you have to wait, and you have to treat that belonging, or the donkey or the ox, until that guy will come back to your country. You don't know who he is. You have to take it and put it in your house and treat it as if it's your own until your brother will come back. Of course, the Talmud comes and says in Masechet Bava Metzia how long it is. You don't have to do it forever and ever, but at least you have to do it for a year, and you have to respect the belongings that you found, and you can't throw it. Today it's much easier because today we've got a possibility of announcing or bring it to the police station and so on. But anyhow, you can see that the Torah is talking about the whole time achicha, achicha, achicha. And it's talking about, especially about the belongings. So here's another interesting thing. The Torah is giving you mitzvot, but using the same word and repeating it over and over again and saying, yes, it's not just somebody else's belongings, it's your brother's belongings. And remember, he would like you to treat it properly, as if you would lose it, so you would like him to treat your belongings with him the same way. So that's interesting. One more thing is uviart in purple, uviarta hara mikirbecha, uviarta hara b'Yisrael, uviarta hara mikirbecha, which appears many, many times here, which means the bad things you should get out of Israel. Uviarta means get rid and dispose and kill and ruin things which are not part. And that's one of the things that Sefer Dvarim, the last book, is really preserving many, many times to warn Am Yisrael before they come into Eretz Yisrael. Remember, there's laws, and don't behave like the Goyim. Don't behave like the other Gentiles. Perhaps the other Gentiles are behaving well, that's good. If they don't behave like well, don't copy them. In Israel, you don't behave that. By the way, here is a very seldom place which is written, Uviat Aram Israel. You can see the word Israel, 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 which means the Jewish people. You can't behave like that. So here you can see many times it's written, and it carries on in the whole parasha. I said 74 mitzvot. We won't go through the whole mitzvot, but many times it's written, Uviarta hara mikirbecha. Get rid of the terrible behavior and the terrible ways that other Gentiles behave. You are much higher than that. Okay, so that's what the Torah is trying to show many times in this parasha, and trying to show that the Israel behaved differently than other people. We wish we would try and see that also today. Unfortunately, it doesn't always happen. We can't see the Jews behaving better than other Jews, but when the Mashiach will come, we hope tomorrow morning, we hope the Jews will behave much better. And remember, the Torah is saying it very seriously. Behave differently from other people. Okay, so that's what I wanted to show, because you can go to each mitzvah and go to so many details, but I'm just giving you some different aspects that the mitzvah is really special right there. Okay, so any questions? Victor, please.
Yeah, I wanted to say something interesting that you mentioned, and somehow after you mentioned it, it dawned on me that the Ben Sorer Umore comes immediately.
Actually, it never happened.
After the, I know that. It comes immediately after Aisha Snua.
Yes.
And it doesn't say what Ben, and you mentioned that the Isha Snua is with Yaakov. And can you bring it to the screen? Do you mind that piece of the, you know, the
Just
Torah.
1 second. Let me go back again. I'll just look for it. Just 1 second.
We're in the first page that you
This
showed.
one is first page. I'll go to the first page. Okay, I'm going to the first page. Just 1 second.
It could be just my imagination, but
Okay, here you are.
yeah,
Okay.
I can't see it. Can you see? Oh, here it is.
Okay, let
Okay.
me see it a little bit smaller.
So,
okay, you got
the-
it? Got everything? Okay.
Yeah, that's one. We know you mentioned Yaakov and
Yes.
Sivan, and now
Taking two
Yaakov,
women and so on. Yes.
Reuven was Bechor, and he really should have had the Bechorah.
נכון.
But as we know, ראובן בכורי אתה כוחי וראשית אוני, גם פה הוא is mentioning ראשית עונו, כוחי וראשית, יתר סוד יתר פחז כמיים.
But he sinned, by the way. He
כי
sinned. He
עלית
didn't get
משכבי
it.
אביך, כי חיללת יצואי עלה.
Of course, he rebelled against his father and took
Right.
his father's concubine, and I won't go into that. Did he really take his father's concubine, or he changed the beds? But it means he rebelled against his father. So actually, he's a tiny bit Ben Sorer Omore, a tiny bit. He doesn't.
Anyway,
Yes.
I just wanted to say the all portion here is remind so much there. They're talking about Ben
Exactly.
Sorer Umore that
Of
did
course.
not get, it does not get the, usually they say here, he must get the Bechorah, the son of the son. But
Right.
in Yaakov, in Reuven, he did not, because his punishment was he was supposed to be dying. You were supposed to punish him for that, but luckily he just got
They should have rewarded somebody else instead of him. So why not to take Shimon? Why not to take Levi? Why do you run to the number 11?
No, that's
11 son.
okay, but that's something else. Eventually, the Bechorah did not go to Yosef.
Reuben.
But maybe Yosef was the Bechor from the other woman. You can say,
Yes,
I don't have
the
Bechor
loved
from
woman,
this.
and she was much later and so on. You're perfectly right.
But no, I have two Bechorim, one from this woman, one from this one. The Bechor
But
from
who
this
deserved
woman
it?
did not-
Who deserved it? Leah deserved it. Leah deserved it.
Okay, but the whole thing here about this, including all the Arayot,
Yes.
they're talking about also close to what happened with Yaakov and Reuven. Just the all things together. When you mention it, it opened the Pandora.
It opens a Pandora thing, and we can see there was problematic problems in Yaakov's household. Definitely.
Sure.
There was a lot of enviness. There was a lot of jealousy. There was a lot. It wasn't simple. You know who had it worse? David. David HaMelech. He had so many problems. I'm teaching now Shmuel. He had so many problems, and even so, he had to maneuver between all that. So
but the difference is, you're right. But the difference is, David himself was problematic. In Yaakov's case, it wasn't him, it was his household.
It was household. But he was responsible, and the Torah is trying to say by hint, don't behave the 5% of Yaakov. 95% behave like him, but he wasn't completely, he's righteous, he's a prime thing, but even so, we're the only religion that knows to also take responsibility in saying those people weren't perfect. They are people, and they died, by the way. Also, Moshe Rabbeinu died. He wasn't a saint, and he was a normal person. Yes, he was a very highly person, but he died. So I'm always saying our religion is completely different from other religions. We haven't got saints. We've got people which are very high, but they did mistakes, and we have to learn from their mistakes. טוב, כל טוב, בסדר.
תודה רבה, היה נהדר.
Thank you.
תודה רבה, להתראות, כל טוב.